Hello and welcome to Cloud Speed by Deloitte. In this regular podcast series, we'll delve into the world of cloud, answering some of those tricky questions, getting to grips with all that cloud has to offer, and keeping you up to speed on recent developments. So let's begin, shall we? Here is your host, Aarti Balakrishnan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Speed by Deloitte. I'm Aarti Balakrishnan, a director in our cloud engineering practice, and I'll be your host for this episode. In our last episode, we touched on the topic of cloud migration. We provided you with some top tips on getting it right. I would encourage you to have a listen if you haven't done so already. In this episode, we will be exploring the topic of cloud inertia. We have been excited about cloud for over a decade now, and it's been the biggest tech disruption since the internet. While we've been talking about this topic for so long, the rate of cloud adoption has not caught up at the same pace. What is the cause for this inertia? To unpack this topic with me today, I'm delighted to be joined by one of our transformation leaders, Dave Parkin. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Aarti. Really pleased to be here today. So I am Dave Parkin. I am a partner within our public sector consulting practice, and I lead and oversee all of the work that we deliver into our public sector clients that is cloud and cloud service related.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for joining me. We've been talking about cloud for a while. We have rebranded our infrastructure engineering practice into cloud engineering practice, and we've been doing more cloud work. Having said that, the rate of adoption of cloud has been escalating at a steady pace, let me put it that way. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you think are the drivers around it?
So thanks, Aarti. I mean, that's a really good question. And, I focus on the public sector, and it's clear that in the public sector, there's a real desire to accelerate the adoption and use of cloud services in order to improve delivery of services to the citizen. What we have noted over the last year during the period of COVID is an accelerated use and desire to adopt cloud and cloud services within the public sector. And that has come about as a result of the many new initiatives that have needed to be put in place as part of government's response to COVID. However, many of the challenges that existed prior to COVID still continue to exist today. And they fall into three or four key areas. I mean, firstly, there's always been a bit of a concern within our public sector clients around the security of the cloud. And if they are to move workloads and data into the public cloud or into a hybrid cloud solution, just how secure will the data be outside of their own data center premises? So that is something that is becoming more well understood. The fact that you can build in and have better control over the security of your cloud instances, but there's still a little way to go there. There's also a real challenge around legacy IT, and I suspect that's not unique to the public sector. But we have heard statistics that 50% of government IT spend is on keeping the lights on for legacy IT, of their legacy IT. And we're talking here about, systems that have been developed 20 to 40 years ago, mainframes, etc., that are at the heart of public service delivery. Doesn't matter whether it's tax, whether it's welfare, whether it's defense related systems. There is some very old IT still knocking around that is consuming a significant amount of the IT budget. And what that leads to, given that government has to operate within a defined budget, is reduced spend to deliver the transformation and the change and the delivery of new services in new ways in order to modernize the way that public service is delivered to the citizen, and at the same time to drive out cost effectiveness. So there's something there about legacy IT and needing to sort of chip away at that, and that being something that is very hard to resolve. There is something about skills and confidence, and again, I'm sure that's not unique to the public sector, but the sheer scale of technology that the public sector is dependent on to deliver public service, and the need to move that to more modern technology and more modern ways of working requires skills. And there is a huge activity underway in the public sector to acquire and develop in-house the skills necessary to do this. But there is still some way to go there. There's still a huge dependency on suppliers and strategic partners to get this work done. And in doing that, the job knowledge and the understanding isn't being retained as they move from project to project. And then finally, there's just something about confidence in being able to migrate to the cloud as well. There is a perception out there that this is a very challenging activity to undertake, and the confidence to be able to move workload, to create new solutions, to create new services in the cloud is growing. It's growing, but it's still not there yet. We've got to remember also that in the public sector, there are many things that the public sector operates, which is deemed to be critical national infrastructure. And critical national infrastructure is subject to many controls, limitations, and standards that are still being worked through with regards to how those could be delivered over the cloud. So there are many facets to some of the challenges that may be considered inertia within the public sector, but these are being progressively addressed and have been accelerated to some extent by experiences during COVID. So that's my perspective on why we have some challenges scaling adoption within the public sector. But what about wider financial services and private sector, Aarti?
I would like to start by picking up on your COVID theme, Dave. It's given people a lot of confidence to adopt cloud because there was no other option. And specifically in the digital workplace-led solutions, it's had a similar impact both in financial services and in private sector organizations. However, talking about this more in the longer term, the impact from a regulatory standpoint, the risk appetite in financial services organizations around hosting data in various locations, getting the regulators to understand that, demonstrating security, those have been the biggest barriers from a financial services standpoint. More importantly, the variety of services that were required by financial services organizations and the evolution of services provided by public cloud providers haven't quite met the criteria that was necessary. They are now, and hence the increased adoption of cloud in financial services. Whereas if I was looking at it from a private sector perspective, digital transformation has accelerated the adoption of public cloud sooner than it has in both of our industries, for FS or public sector. But it has remained very customer-centric, and it hasn't percolated to all parts of technology in the organization. Again, this is now a tipping point where a combination of factors around skills, services from the cloud providers, regulatory input are all coming together to drive the adoption further, but we're not there yet. I would like to sort of shift our attention to our next question in terms of how has COVID helped, specifically in the public sector, change mindsets around cloud adoption? What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Really good question, that, Aarti. COVID has made a material difference in the public sector, I believe, on cloud adoption. You'll recall right at the outset of the COVID pandemic and early stages of lockdown, statements were being made by ministers about wanting to make choices on the basis of science and on the basis of data-led decisions, science-based decisions. And, that very quickly worked its way through to the need to assemble a myriad of data sets for a myriad of use cases within government in order for the government to make informed choices as to what it was going to do as we go through the COVID period, and to make informed policy choices. And so that resulted in the need to rapidly spin up capability, initiatives, solutions, services in as part of the COVID response in aspects relating to health, in aspects relating to some of the policies set out by Treasury. So what that has resulted in is the need for various platforms to be built in the cloud to allow data sets from various parts of government to come together to enable choices to be made. That could not have been done had it not been for the cloud. And teams have been formed very rapidly in various parts of the public sector to enable that to happen. They have leveraged all of the benefits of the cloud, not only to host these new solutions, but to make use of some of the data, the analytics capabilities that exist and are made available on the cloud to rapidly spin up some of those capabilities. And as citizens, we see the benefit of all of that. So when we see briefings taking place on the telly and we see those graphs and we see those statistics, they are all born out of platforms that have been built into the cloud.
I'm sure every single one of us has experienced a number of these sessions and seen those graphs as well, and the impact it's having on our day-to-day lives. It's quite an interesting angle from a public sector point of view, where the whole COVID experience has enabled cloud adoption a little bit more faster to a certain extent. Shifting gears a little bit in terms of leadership, and how do you think the leadership has evolved and adopted public cloud as such? And how have they been an enabler or a deterrent in adopting public cloud?
That is a good question, Aarti. And there are two parts to responding to that. So first, leadership from the center of government around cloud and cloud adoption. So UK government, announced some 8 to 10 years ago the concept of the G cloud, the government cloud. And that fundamentally was all about putting in place education and enablers to allow government to experiment and begin to adopt the cloud. So at the center, there was the creations of standards and guidance by which government departments could start consuming the cloud and leverage the cloud. A number of commercial enablers were in place to make it more easy for government departments to acquire cloud and cloud-related services from industry. And at the same time, there was a real desire to begin to build a skill base within government. And there was something called the Government Digital Service, or GDS, that was created that had a cadre of skilled individuals to develop digital solutions predicated on the cloud that could be seeded into government departments and discrete projects to begin to build out that knowledge and understanding of how to deliver services in the cloud. And then clearly training, attraction of new talent, and the whole development of STEM skills. That is something that government has been pushing extremely hard across industry and within government to make sure that UK PLC has the skill base it needs to truly derive the benefit of cloud. So there's central leadership and orchestration, if you like. And then if we think about each individual government department, arm's length body, agency, there's been a real push in recent years to understand the impact of new technology and the impact of digital on how government departments deliver their services to the citizen. And more recently, that has created the role of the CDO has been created, which is the Chief Digital Information Officer. In the past, government departments typically, not always, but typically would have a CIO and a CDO, Chief Information Officer, Chief Digital Officer. Chief Information Officer typically would run the business of technology and IT services. The Chief Digital Officer would be working with the business to understand how could they derive the benefit of technology. These two have now been brought together. And, there are, in most government departments now, there is a CDIO whose purpose in life is to derive the benefit of technology and deliver citizen services in a much more digital and in a much more dynamic way, leveraging the benefits of digital techniques, agile ways of working, cloud and cloud-enabled services, AI, ML, etc. Those CDIOs are beginning to instill revised ways of working across the enterprises, across each of the government departments to, develop, spin up projects, initiatives, new services much more rapidly, leveraging the technologies like the cloud.
I would echo similar roles being set up across private sector as well as financial services organizations. I did want to bring up one more point on public sector before we move to the other sectors, Dave, around how the government was probably ahead of its time in pulling together papers around digital services, G Cloud. Do you want to touch upon that before we move on to the other industries?
That's a really good point, Aarti. I mean, it was about 2010 when government created a number of papers that sought to modernize the use of IT and technology across the totality of the public sector. And one of the schemes one of the initiatives that came out of that was called G Cloud. And G Cloud set the standards for not only digital service design, but also, adoption of cloud, and put a number of enablers in place. The most recent manifestation of that is something called OneGov Cloud Strategy. So a couple of years ago, a new strategy specifically setting out how government will begin to accelerate the adoption of cloud was defined. It was sponsored by the Government Commercial Office and GDS concurrently, and that seeks to put more enablers and more guidance in place, and a number of enabling arrangements with hyperscaler providers to truly accelerate the adoption of cloud across UK government.
Thank you, Dave, for that interesting perspective. I would say, similar to public sector, financial services organizations have been solutioning around adopting cloud for a while now. But the thing that has been getting in the way for them is the governance around securing approvals for how data can be managed in a global context, considering a number of these banks are global. And the governance now has been simplified. The regulators now have given clear guidance. This is making the whole governance a lot less cumbersome, and the approval process a lot less cumbersome, and helping organizations adopt more of public cloud. Not just for non-critical workloads, but also for business-critical applications. Dave, in a previous question, you did touch upon the skills and capabilities required. I also think agility and how these techniques are applied in terms of unlocking value sooner are equally important in making sure when you do deliver cloud, you're not waiting for multi-year programs to mature before you see any benefits. What are your thoughts around the impact of agility and agile delivery techniques in delivering cloud?
Clearly, as a cloud practitioner, it's extremely important. And I've been, pleased to see, progress across the public sector in adopting, more agile techniques in delivering large scale, complex programs that fundamentally change how the public sector delivers services to the citizen. One of the key challenges public sector organizations have, and I'm sure this can be the case in other sectors as well, is that it has to be able to justify the use of every taxpayer's pound, and to be able to demonstrate value for money. And historically, that has required significant amount of upfront investment in designing and scheduling the delivery of an initiative, in a waterfall way. So they're able to sort of predict the likely costs and the likely schedule and the likely outputs well in advance of starting work to deliver them. And that is done through an atypical business case process. What we have seen over recent years is the introduction of more agile approval processes and more agile ways of being able to use agreed funding to deliver projects, where the occasional failure or the occasional piece of work that actually doesn't doesn't essentially become part of the end solution is okay. And the general experience is that wherever those agile techniques have been integrated into the ways of delivering projects, actually, the project tends to be delivered quicker and it tends to be delivered more cheaply. And the learnings from that are beginning to change mindsets and culture and ways of working and standards for delivering these sorts of projects, especially those on the cloud.
Thank you, Dave. Just an addition from a financial services standpoint would be, alongside agile delivery techniques, the shift to a product-based model is having a real impact in financial services. Ownership around managing products end-to-end, iterating those products to meet customer demands, and having true focus on the end-to-end delivery cycle within the product team has also helped in adopting cloud services a lot quicker and unlocking value for the business a lot quicker in financial services. So, Dave, we've managed to unpack the cloud inertia topic by talking through what was the cause in the first place across sectors, how our leadership reacting to enabling adoption, how the skills and capabilities coming together to help us manage and solve this, and how does being agile enable cloud adoption. It almost feels like we're at a tipping point where the factors that were deterrents to moving at pace are now being so slowly resolved. Am I right, or do you feel differently about it?
It'll be really interesting, Aarti, to see post-COVID, how continued take-up of cloud, will occur over the next couple of years. It's clear that all the enablers are being put in place. Organizations are putting in place cloud centers of excellence, hubs that are trying to instill new ways of working, derive the skills that are necessary, educate, seniors, and leaders across the public sector into the benefits of adopting cloud and cloud services as part of an overarching digital strategy. Many public sector organizations, have digital ambitions, transformation programs underway to fundamentally change how the business interacts with technology and how technology interacts with the business. That is accelerating at pace, and is being repeated across government departments. And so you are beginning to see, things like DevSecOps, the institution of FinOps in order to support cloud services. All of that is now being put in place as a platform on which to scale cloud adoption. So I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in the public sector and to be involved in cloud as well.
Thank you, Dave. I've really enjoyed exploring the topic with you. And like you say, we are at a tipping point where we expect cloud adoption to grow more and more. And it's the most exciting space to be at the present time. I hope you've enjoyed listening to today's episode. Please share the Cloud Speed series with your colleagues, friends, and on social media, and subscribe to our podcast platform to be notified of the latest episode. If you'd like to find out more about Deloitte's cloud capabilities, please visit deloitte.co.uk/cloud. Until next time, this is Aarti Balakrishnan signing off, and you've been listening to Cloud Speed by Deloitte. Thank you.